Welcome back, Improvement Nerds. In this episode, we're putting the fun back in fungibility with Dr. Rebecca Ellis, a seasoned expert in organizational design and change with 20 plus years of experience across industries like healthcare, manufacturing, and finance. Rebecca joins us to explore how flexible, compatibility-driven teams can unlock engagement, agility, and innovation across your organization. We'll talk about moving beyond job titles, breaking down silos, and designing systems that actually work for people. So buckle up. This one's all about rethinking how we staff, grow, and lead as we wage war on bad process. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us today on the Improvement Nerds podcast and nerding out with us.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the invite.
So today we're going to talk about placing the fun back in fungibility. Can we just back up or pause for a minute and talk about what is fungibility?
Absolutely. I think the term is probably used most with currency and how you can exchange things and still be the same rate, et cetera. In the HR world around talent, we use it as a way to talk about how we can help make more fluid choices around our talent. And so it allows us to think about jobs less as a stable kind of, this is the team you sit in and the organization you're always going to represent. And instead gives us a chance to think about things just a bit more fluid than that.
I like that challenge, especially as we think of jobs and job roles. And I wonder, how does that affect HR job roles and responsibilities when they're posting job descriptions? How would you include fungibility in that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Job descriptions in and of themselves are fairly static, right? And you are typically trying to articulate the needs of the day. And often you'll see a little bit around the competencies or experience that you would expect a person to have. In terms of being more thoughtful about fungible hires, you would care less about the title and maybe the work of the day, and you would care more about their capabilities and think about already from the get-go the portability of that talent. And so while everything probably needs a title for your HRIS system and needs some probably hiring manager that you would be direct lined into, you would actually try to advertise a job in a way that captures more of a range of capabilities that a person could do. And you would already have in your mind some of the ways that that would map into your job architecture or official job descriptions.
I like it. So developing those capabilities within the employees is different than just cross-training employees. So we have the training in and of itself, cross-training into different areas. How does fungibility step up from just that cross-training perspective?
Yeah, so when you cross-train an employee, you're in essence asking a person to be able to sub in for a specific task. And often we use that in, I think, a most limiting way around like a vacation backfill, for example. But if you were really trying to push the envelope around having more fungible talent landscape, you would actually have on record, probably somewhere in an internal talent marketplace or HR system, the different capabilities a person is able to fill. And then when you would have an open need, even if it were more temporary, you would search those capabilities to kind of plug in a person. So it'd be a less like one-to-one, Rebecca's always backfilling Mark when he's out. And it would be more like Rebecca has a talent around product management, even though she sits over here in marketing. If we had a need in engineering, she could sub in for that and maybe join an even longer term project team.
Why is this concept becoming more and more relevant in today's business world?
Yeah, the business need the flexibility to maximize the talent that they have on board without increasing their headcount to get even more capabilities at the table. We have a lot of people with very diverse capabilities. And so it gives us a chance to maximize and optimize those opportunities without investing more in new headcount to fill a more sort of myopic or a siloed set of work activities. I also think many of us do just enjoy the chance to be a bit more of a MacGyver, right? Less an expert maybe in one space, but able to come in with our duct tape and, fill different gaps in different ways. And so as a engagement perspective for your talent that you have today on staff, I think it gives them a chance to flex new muscles or maybe dust off some capabilities that they've had on the shelf for a bit.
I really like that you touched on the engagement piece because a lot of organizations are always seeking to engage their staff. And I think transforming the people that work for us or with us from the I shape, having a very deep knowledge in one particular area, to more of a T shape can be very engaging for anyone, and maybe even a strategy for improving engagement within the workforce.
Absolutely. When I think about the new generation entering the workforce, I use my own kids as examples. I've got 2 college graduates this year. They have grown up almost solely in an on-demand world. We were, I guess, slightly digital natives in my generation in that we had computers in school from elementary and definitely were more techie than the generation ahead of us. But we also felt like you show up at a job and that's your job, and you work that career till it doesn't serve you as well. And maybe unlike our parents' generation, you don't work it till retirement, but you move in usually in similar packs and similar industries and similar job responsibilities. The new generation is much more gig oriented. I remember when my daughter entered college, she was already thinking on the other end of it that she was going to gig her way through life. Like, I would do this type of work, and then in the afternoon, maybe this type of work. And I would piece together some different opportunities, but not really thinking about like a straight 40 anywhere. Now, she has landed in that bucket and is very happy about it. But one of my other kiddos is still thinking maybe a little more entrepreneurial mindset. And so as the generations, and I would say even myself, I play a couple of very different capabilities in my current firm. I think a lot of us, not just generationally, but especially maybe younger generation, appreciate the chance to develop a lot of diverse capabilities. And so for me, it's an engagement play for all generations, but I'm starting to think that it's a non-negotiable for our early career talent who are just now moving into the workforce.
Yeah, definitely. Can you share any stories or case studies that really illustrate fungibility or see fungibility in action?
Absolutely. There's a few organizations who have been historically just really great at this play. And one of them is Google. So I think we've probably all heard examples of how Google thinks about teams more from a project perspective and even like co-locates you with that team. And that's how you report and how you go about your work until you're on a different team. So it's less about being like in a stable, direct reporting relationship and more about the fluidity that comes with projects. We've seen others take it a bit beyond that and not just think from a project perspective, but in standard run the business everyday work, being more fluid with their bench of talent. And I was working recently with a group of engineers, and they had this dilemma where over time, as you got more tenure and seniority, you kind of gravitated toward the R&D space. It was, one could argue sexier projects, you're getting to build something new, but they also had this need for the plant maintenance and the manufacturing support around engineering. And what they happened to find over time is that their workforce kind of bifurcated into this like cool kids club who got to work on these R&D projects, and then this team of equally talented and skilled engineers who had to take shift work and think about the break fix and such. And over time, what happened was the manufacturability kind of left the brains of the R&D folks, and they started actually engineering things that were causing more issues when manufactured. And so that was sort of the initial concept or trigger here, is like, we've got to get more of the people who understand the manufacturing mechanics to get into the R&D so that the R&D products are more manufacturable. And the R&D folks need to come back to the line so that they understand the implications of their design. And rather than just trying to do like a talent swap, the idea was like, if these roles could be more intertwined. Now, it's tough because some work is more episodic and some is more run the business day to day. But ultimately, we worked on an org design that allowed them to have that fluidity. and didn't create this sort of class-based perspective on the work, right? Brought the work much more to an equal, like it was already kind of graded the same and paid similarly, but some of the dynamics and culture around it were very different. And so we were able to break down the barriers around that as well, while meeting the business objective of having more portable talent.
I think I've heard you to say that this isn't just about skills, but about mindsets.
Yeah.
What mindsets support fungibility?
Yeah. So it's a good question. Certainly, you need a mindset around flexibility. And I'll say probably slightly more, although not maybe always the case, ambiguity, because you're going to be entering into new scenarios, picking up new work activities that maybe are still also taking shape in a way that doesn't just make them a clean like SOP ready to go. So you have to have a little bit of learning agility. I think that's probably true for most any role, but specifically if you're in like a fungible talent pool, you have to have an appetite for kind of figuring things out. Back to that like MacGyver, like gonna make the best of this situation with what I've got and figure out how to best add my talents in this space. I think jobs that are overly prescriptive may not always be the best fit for this type of move. I think you have to, as a leader, be very comfortable sharing talent. And while that seems like a no-brainer, you'll find leaders who tend to take a protectionist perspective on their high performers, sadly to the disadvantage of that talent, and are hesitant to give them up because of how big a benefit they are to their team. So the leaders have to be much more comfortable and almost see their brand as like an internal talent developer. I'm an internal talent scout, finding the best talent, and then I'm also helping them move to the place where they can have the biggest organization impact. I think the continuous improvement mindset is a very similar one in terms of the main traits that make you good in that space. I think would also make you a good manager or a coach of people who are in a more fungible talent play. You're looking at metrics to measure more like real-time data so you can give them good coaching. You're helping them stay on these milestones and yet learn and be agile and move. And at the same time, you're willing to kind of scrap that and start over if it's not working well. Maybe looking for different capabilities and such in the next round of movement.
I really liked how you talked about how leaders can develop behaviors to help evolve this and what cultural blockers there are and being prohibitive or rigid about not sharing resources. How do you help the employee shift away from the rigid role identity or fixed career paths to something that's more flexible?
Yeah, it's a good question because our job architectures are by definition fairly rigid. But if we can broaden them to think more about talent families versus like a specific career ladder, that gives you a little more room to kind of move sideways and not just up and down. And so my first suggestion is around just the truly how you architect roles, making them have also the flexibility in the way that bands and other things. So you wouldn't want it to be a negative consequence to a person that they would have to go down in a grade or down in a salary in order to have that kind of flexibility. I also think there's an aspect around how we think about our own performance that has to change. And that's an individual mindset as well as just a way for a person to think differently about their career. When you're in a more fluid talent landscape, your own individual performance has merit. And that I certainly think as a former HR leader, you definitely need to have a good pulse on your performance at an individual level. But ultimately, fungible teams are more rewarded at the team level. And so that's what allows us to maybe be a little bit more open to the sharing of work and the sharing of results, because that is also how we're being measured and likely rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this in practice. I've seen operators who knew how to do one specific function really, really well, and their identity was tied to that job or that particular function, expand their capabilities, learn new skills within the workplace, and become more engaged. So I've seen this firsthand. I've seen it work, and I've seen their eyes open wide and the engagement take hold. And it was really great leading teams that are able to shift around and be fungible and go into different places within the organization. Now, connecting this to continuous improvement, we've used this a lot in continuous improvement. And, we want our operators, our frontline staff to adhere to standard work. Sometimes that can mean doing the same type of job each day and have repetitive motion, which is good. On one hand, they build up a station dexterity to do that particular function, and that really helps with efficiency and productivity. But you also want to, at the same time, not create station burnout so that they're not doing the same thing all day. And the more skills and capabilities that they get and acquire, we're able to move them to something else, maybe midweek, midday, so that they don't get that burnout and they build the dexterity in other job positions. So within a CI perspective, that's very helpful. And also it allows you to level out your work. So we level out by mixing our types and products, but you can also help remove bottlenecks by having your workforce have a diversity of skill sets. So if there are bottlenecks, they can attack that as a team. Do you see any other benefits to CI in embedding fungibility practices, or what advice would you have for a CI team that wants to create fungibility within their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. You had me thinking, Mark, about even like the ergonomics of doing a repetitive task can be damaging. So from a whole well-being perspective, the fungible talent, being able to put people in the different stations, I think it works a different part of our brain. It works a different part of our body. And so there's big benefits there for sure. I think also from a CI perspective, we have a lot of things that are cyclical in nature. Certainly there's some steady state work, but also the ability of having a fungible staff available to you to put on, some will call them type teams or like other just hot button topics at the moment. What I love the most is when there's a ready bench of these folks who know that they can be kind of tasked the next assignment and don't have to worry about where they fall back into their day job. That's our biggest risk when we pull people off of their current assignment and put them on these temporary assignments. One, it usually puts stress across the team that has to absorb those work activities and can make some sort of animosity against like who gets kind of tapped to do the fun, if they want to call it that, work for a bit. But sometimes we backfill those roles, and then because of the time or level of effort needed, and then that puts the person who has stepped up to take on the new assignment feeling at risk that they don't have that home role to go back to. And so for me, that's another one of the big benefits. And in the way that CI and lean teams think about how they do team formations and kind of pulling in and pushing back out into the org, I think this is a very safe way to protect a person's career and their future opportunities without having them feel like they have to make a choice between one or the other.
What role does pilot testing play in shift? What makes a good pilot?
Oh, pilots can be tough. One of the things, I guess, just as a career change manager, it does make it feel like it's something we could give up on. And like a test balloon that if failed, we just go back to normal. And so I think a pilot needs to be set up as, in terms of the mindset shifts and such needed, kind of the governance and other systemic factors necessary to make fungible talent work. You have to kind of put it all in play. And so for me, it's a bit of like an all in. And sure, maybe you can try it in phased ways, smaller areas, a team, a function, a geography, versus trying to go enterprise wide with it right away in multiple different types of jobs. But I do think there's important lessons learned. There's an old change management saying that says, if you want to learn about an organization, try to change it. I think it was Kurt Lewin maybe. And no organization is exactly the same. And so I do think that some of these test phases are helpful in that you can start to understand what in your own specific organization culture is going to work for or against you. But I do want to stress that I think it's important you have all of the enabling variables in place and not just try to be half in. So you're going to have to think different about your work processes and make them designs that they have high quality, even when you have flexible talent. You're going to have to create structural decision rights that are flexible, governance for better information sharing to kind of break down some of those, what we would consider like traditional matrix, even reporting blockers. You're going to have to think about that team performance shift, which is probably not existing in the rest of the org. The compensation may or may not need some shifting based on the fungibility and just the general kind of environment around that. So that's where I would say a test balloon is tough unless you literally put all of the aspects in place to make it possible, which might mean you're going to have to live in like a dual system in some cases for things like comp and talent.
I'm interested in your take on governance and how to stay flexible without slipping into chaos.
Yeah, it's definitely a potential slippery slide. Again, I think a lot of the principles around governance and continuous improvement would be very applicable here. For one, it's just open lines of communication and extra transparency around performance and blockers, the barriers where things are getting hung up and where a person might not be in the best fit position. And so a lot of it is just making that data and information more visible to who is an important question. And so from a fungible perspective, you might not have single clear reporting line. And so that's where you have to get really clear around who is directing the work, who is measuring the performance, who has access to best clear and coach some of these different obstacles. And so for me, you have to do really good contracting and probably have a nice little racy or rapid chart handy that helps us break those ties when there does start to see a little bit of chaos in the system.
Great. And now moving on to strategic alignment and transformation, how does fungibility support broader organizational goals like digital transformation or agile operating models?
Yeah, so I think that there's definitely a play for fungible talent on a transformation type of initiative. Some of that probably sounds a little bit more like traditional project teams, but I think there's a chance for fluidity here that could be really beneficial. We talk a lot about the benefit of diverse thinking. And in my opinion, there's no better way than to get diversity of thought and behavior and action and skill than a talent bench that you can pull from. So even some of my Fortune 500 clients have a pretty weak bench when you come to like the high performers that get tapped for these strategic initiatives. And so I think there's an advantage to having a mindset of more fluid ways of staffing that work and giving more people exposure, maybe not owning something end to end as we might think about things today, but having clear handoffs and getting just more seats at that table, even if it's a bit of a revolving table, I guess is kind of the end point there. But when you think about digital, AI, agile, these are not singular capability moves. They are multidimensional. And so I find it rare that a person can hire full time for specific capabilities. And so back to the idea of cross training, like the cross hiring of capability, like getting some really smart people in who can bring a lot of different things to the table definitely allows you to think more about the fluid movement of those projects throughout the life of them.
Yeah, and that could probably help reduce friction when strategies or priorities shift suddenly.
Yes.
Do you have any other tips or do you see any other ways that fungibility can help with that?
Yeah, I do think it can allow you to be more, fluid with your staffing on things as they ramp up and down. And it can allow you to, give a bit more, in some cases, even fractional. So I've been talking about fungibility more in like moving full bodies at a time, but really it can come into play from a more fractional perspective too. Now that starts to compete sometimes with your day job and what we know if you have a day job that is kind of run the business, keep the lights on, you got to keep going, and a fun project that's more strategic, the day job will win out every day. And so I am advocating that people are more kind of fully commissioned to be in this fungible way and not sort of suffering the burden of the day job. But in some cases, we can go in a more fractional way, able to tap into more as well and kind of expand into areas, specifically when you're wanting just to try an innovation and see if that is going to get off the ground versus kind of taking the full step to maybe commission a full-time permanent team around it. So I see a lot of advantages at the strategic level. I actually think it's an amazing breeding ground for executive talent. We ask executive leaders to show up as leaders of the enterprise, not their functional expertise or the area that they came from. So as CFO, often kind of thinking about the enterprise anyway, sort of looking across their space. But when you bring a person maybe as like the head of Americas, they might not be as attuned as what's going on in Europe. Or if you bring a person in from a point of view in a specific part of IT or a specific part of engineering, they may be worried mostly about their discipline first and the company level second. But if you put them through some rotations, and rotational assignments have been popular for many decades, but rotations through these more fungible talent pools, you will inherently get a person who is going to think more in terms of enterprise, less silos, more in systems, less in here's what I need to take care of in my own shop, which generally benefits the whole organization over time.
Yeah, I remember being in an organization and the CEO would just at times switch heads of functional areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, they don't know anything about that particular work function. How are they going to best serve it if they don't know? But they were looking for the other tangibles. To your point, those folks, when they're in those positions, it helps them to see more enterprise wide or see the whole value stream for what it is and how their decisions might impact subsequent processes or subsequent events that happen or even upstream events. So it really did help the organization all row together in the same direction, which I thought was amazing. But it was just a little shocking at first to see that.
Absolutely. My $1 million idea is the pill I have not yet invented that would allow all people leaders to be systems thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe it's just a way your brain is either wired or not. I know there are things you can do to develop around it for sure, but more often than not is either you're built that way or not built that way. To me, this is an amazing mitigation strategy for people who might not automatically be thinking about the impacts of their work upstream and downstream. But as you have the chance to float in and out of and be exposed to different aspects of the business in a way that you're able to bring your capability to the table, not just as an observer or a person who's kind of there to just soak it in, but literally roll up your sleeves because you're still adding value in a new space. To me, that's an amazing development opportunity to help people who maybe even aren't quite as systems thinking oriented by default.
Yeah. And another point too, I think I heard you mention was by doing that, it helps to foster cost efficiencies and innovation because they can see things through different lenses.
Absolutely.
And I think I also heard you talk about AI. What role does AI play in helping or hindering fungibility?
Well, so it's a good question because I myself am still feeling like I've only scratched the tip of this iceberg, but I have to believe that in the future of our talent systems, our HRIS systems, namely like the Workdays and such of the world, they already hold data around what I would consider like an internal talent marketplace. And so I have to believe that from an AI perspective, you could get really good intelligence on the type of work people were doing in their last positions, the capabilities that they have acquired, even if not self-attesting to being mastery of, and then predicting where they would be best fit. So I think AI has a lot of room for us in terms of how we find and place talent in the future. I also think that as people take up new capabilities, AI is an amazing enabler for that rote, especially basic stuff. And so I made an earlier comment about like SOP types of jobs are probably not where you would find the most leverage in fungibility. And I was thinking about that more from like necessary routine work activities. To me, I would not build a lot of extra talent dynamic around things that are easily taken up, like an early career type of work that a person could read an SOP and run with tomorrow. I think there's flexible staffing models and ways that you can think about how to plug that work in. But if it's routine and highly regulated, like, for example, nurse staffing, nurses can be a full-time employee or they can be a PRN employee. PRN meaning as needed and kind of plug in. And why that is safe is because the nursing work has very strong standard work. Using my CI terms there, you would come into a new hospital that you'd never worked before, but you would still know this is the appropriate way to draw blood. This is the appropriate way to make sure that they have safety in all of their different daily care needs. And so I feel comfortable bringing in a person, quote unquote, fresh off the street because the work is fairly standardized. For me, that is not a fungible talent pool. That's a flexible talent pool. A fungible talent pool would be, I know my nurses and a couple of them got their first degrees in marketing. And when it comes time for us to think about how we brand our next career offerings, I'm going to pull them in for some work on that. Again, could be fractional and paying them to take time off patient care, but onto this effort. Or it could be that they move through a pool of work that gives them patient care informed guidance around a new capability that we knew they had in the HRIS system because I identified them as having a degree in marketing, which was noticeable and findable in our HR talent marketplace. So I hope that example kind of tells a little bit of the difference of two. But for me, AI allows you to take up easily the basic kind of routine, what would be rote memorization probably in 2 days type of work. And then also maybe give you some inspiration for the things that do require a little more strategic, thoughtful, less routine input. So I believe it's going to be a real talent accelerator, especially as we get more comfortable with the information that it gives you in order to increase your performance.
Yeah, definitely something to keep our eye on. Do you see organizations using fungibility more and more? Do you see this trending upwards as a new normal for a workforce strategy?
So there was some data pulled in, I think, 22 that over 85% of the HR folks who were surveyed said that they are working on ways to have more portable, more mobile, more fungible talent. So I think it's a desire. I do think that there are a lot of historic challenges in the way that we think about jobs and the way that we think about reporting relationships. Hard lines, like dotted lines, are, often things that organizations shy away from. They like the solid line. They like to know kind of the accountability and the decision rights and such around talent there. So I think just like matrix reporting, it's popular, especially if you have a global business. It's often also seen as like a, gotta have it, but I wish I didn't because it creates some complication. I think this is a similar topic in that it has a lot of the same dynamics that make it challenging. And therefore, companies are, I think, hesitant to kind of go all in on it.
And what would be your advice to HR or OD professionals who are hesitant to embrace this shift?
Well, my first advice is probably for hiring managers and talent acquisition folks, which is more about hiring for potential and thinking more long-term about the play of that talent versus the job that they're filling tomorrow, which is often a lot more narrow. And so hiring more for a broad set of capability and with an OD and HR perspective, landing them more in a place where they have the flexibility and fluidity in terms of their job design. And so I do think there's job design challenges, to think about. There's job architecture challenges in terms of how career ladders and banding and just the skill matrix themselves are put together. And then there's this whole measurement piece around total rewards, compensation, kind of how we think about rewarding these people more based on team, as we talked about. So to me, those are some of the foundational pieces that would have to be well architected in order to be successful. But again, I think you could do those in soft launch types of ways, right? In more contained ways to try it out in your own culture, in your own dynamic.
So don't wad up the organizational chart and just throw it away.
Not yet, but if you're thinking about doing so, I'd be happy to talk to you about your B2 on that.
If you had a magic wand and you could fix one barrier to fungibility in organizations, what would it be?
Mindset, for sure. Sharing of talent and believing that we can keep a fungible workforce busy. I think there's probably, although it's hard to hire W-2s, especially in today's environment, and thoughts around wanting to limit headcount, there's probably a lot more appetite to hire and have control. And it's my person and I've got a name and I know how they're doing because they're on my team every day, versus being comfortable going to a pool of talent and trusting that you're going to get a good match out of that. So I think it's leader behavior and mindset that would be the first magic wand piece for me.
And as we begin to wrap up here, what question didn't I ask you about fungibility?
Goodness, Mark, I think you've asked me a lot of really great ones. Probably people are wondering if it's better for some size of org than others. So maybe that's worth commenting on. Like, this sounds like something a big company would do, right? The Googles, the Spotifys of the world, they've got models around this, but they're large. Like, I'm a mid-market, sub 200 employee person group. Could this work for me? And I would say for sure, already most of my smaller org clients, even if I'm talking a fraction of an org that sits in Germany that serves, a bigger global presence as a brand, they're already having to think about how to double hat, as you might call it, or build on capability for an individual because they just don't have the money to fund extra headcount. And so I think orgs of any size could benefit from thinking about capabilities that hang together, how we hire for more diverse capabilities in any one individual in the future. So we've got portability around them and around their future. So that's my question not answered, or asked and answered, is I think that this is absolutely in any industry, any size of org potential solution.
That's perfect. And where can listeners learn more from you or continue the conversation? How can we find you?
Yes, the best way to find me is at AlignOrg.com. And AlignOrg does org design, transformation, activations. We are in our 32nd year in existence and bring a very design thinking, very collaborative, co-creating approach to how we think about people structures to best answer the work, to best serve the customers. And so that's the best place to learn more.
Great. And we'll try to post any links or ways to get a hold of you that we can in our comment section. But thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the chat.
And that's a wrap of this episode of the Improvement Nerd Podcast. A big thank you to Dr. Rebecca Ellis for helping us unpack the power of fungibility and how it can transform the way we think about roles, talent, and team design. If today's conversation sparked some new ideas, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a fellow improvement nerd. We've got more great conversations coming your way. Until next time, keep improving, keep learning, and always remember to leave your processes better than you found them.